Good evening and welcome to this installment of the Kuhn Academy and AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. This is going to be the final installment here of 2016. I know most of these videos were not new, but I wanted to end the year with one here. This is pretty much your life that we're going to cover here in these slides. We're going to look at the late 90s, picking up from the mid 90s and the contract with America that you should have watched. And we're going to take it through the new millennium, pretty much through the election of Barack Obama. So I'll try to be as short as I can, but obviously it's hard as a historian having lived through this with that. So here are key concepts we're going to focus on. All right. And by the way, that music there is, as you probably all know, Tupac Shakur and California Love. Not that I'm trying to be knowledgeable in that stuff, but that is from the Straight Outta Compton and rap movement of the 90s, which we hopefully are good synthesizers back to the, yes, you guessed it, Harlem Renaissance. Very nice. Okay. So key concepts we're going to look at here. We got the end of the Cold War bringing new challenges to America's leadership in the world, because we being the United States is the lone superpower, and we kind of have to redefine our foreign policy and our global role. Also, another key concept, as we head into the 21st century, 2000s, all right, the nation continued to experience challenges stemming from social, economic, and demographic changes. So we're seeing a big change in society. We're seeing a lot of economic changes, going all the way back to the New Deal, and then some demographic changes just as far as who is an American and who's living here essentially. All things we're still arguing about here in the presidential election of 2016. Okay, so moving forward, all right, so here's some of these demographic changes we're talking about. You'll see a huge change in immigration with a large increase since 1961 of immigrants from Asia, all right, as well as from Latin America. Okay, but you see in 1961 we have 3 million immigrants. Now we're up to 9 million in the 90s and 2000s. All right, probably when a number of your relatives at some point probably came during this time for a lot of you in the class. Okay, and the reason for this increased immigration, we're hopefully figured out already in our notes, was the Immigration Act of 1965, part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, that overturned a lot of those national origins quotas going back to the 20s. Okay, so you can kind of see the birthplace of most of our immigrants in the 90s and 2000s. Over half from Latin America, another quarter from Asia, very few from Europe, and then the other category over here. I should note about these European immigrants, you can probably guess a lot of those in the 90s were coming from the former Soviet Union. Now that that has fallen, that's bringing a lot more immigration from that region, because they really couldn't immigrate during the Cold War. Okay, and then you can kind of see the place of residencies of these various demographics. All right, so American Indian population, you'll notice none up here in Illinois. Asian population, you see a few dots here across the country, but primarily in California and around the Las Vegas area. Black population you see centered primarily here in the South. Now this is in the 1990s, so you can think back to the impact of slavery, and any slavery essays you read in the AP exam. There's some great synthesis, because that's still where the majority of the black population is. And then you can see the Hispanic population, see a little up here around Illinois, but primarily Texas, New Mexico, California, Arizona there. Okay, so having huge ramifications on immigration policies and debates and things today. All right, so these demographic changes, we see migration from what we call the Frost Belt, which would be the Northeast. And you can put us in that, I guess, if you walked outside today. I'm filming this in 2016, and it's expected to be sub-zero in the next couple days, to the Sun Belt down in the Southeast, where we showed a lot of that Latino population. So the South and West naturally are going to have the most significant population gains, and that is primarily due to the, let's see if you can figure it out, EC. All right, this isn't what caused it, but this isn't affected that. But with the big population gains there, that is going to mean more votes in the Electoral College for the southern and eastern states. Southern and western states, California, Texas, Arizona, places like that. And then the aging population is another demographic change. As these baby boomers start getting older, that's going to threaten the solvency, or how much money is going to be left in Social Security and, yes, you guessed it, Medicare. Okay, so the aging demographics is putting a big strain on the budget for the country as well. All right, so conservatism is continuing from the 80s with Reagan, both socially and fiscally. Okay, cultural conservatism is the term Foner uses in the text, and I've seen politicians refer to this as the 3 Gs. That's God, guns, and gays, which is what usually brings up some of these culture wars, where we start seeing feuds in elections and policies at the state level. We're seeing it with baking cakes at weddings for gay weddings. There's an issue about that in certain states, and then also in the North Carolina bathroom, transgender laws and things like that. Um, and obviously gun control stems every time there's a mass shooting. There becomes talks about that. So those become huge issues in these culture wars that divide our population. All right, you can relate that back to the 20s and even the 50s and 60s. Okay, see family values in retreat. So you can see the changing demographics of the family. In 1970, around when I was born, so about 40% of the population had married couples with children. Only 30% were married with no kids, right, or dinks as they were called, double income, no kids. Um, and then that number shrinks down to 23%. So the family took a 17% hit there, okay, with that, but a bigger increase in other families with children, other families without children. So this would be the divorce rates, single parent households and stuff like that. That became a huge issue in the 1992 election with Dan Quayle, something we might talk about in class. Like I told you, hard to give notes on this because it's there's a lot to talk about. Okay, then there's also an anti-government movement. Most notable was an explosion at a federal building in Oklahoma City by a guy named Timothy McVeigh, who was just protesting big government, and he happened to do that on the day before April 20th, which we all know about April 20th and Columbine. It's a little different story. I won't make the notes here, but you probably have heard about it before. All right, and then to close out the decade, we see the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Okay. Note that he was not removed from office, so he does have something in common with Andrew Johnson, having been impeached, but he did not leave office like Nixon did, or Nixon resigned before the impeachment could happen. And the reason for the impeachment was an affair that he had with Monica Lewinsky, so this cartoon kind of shows Clinton with his greatest accomplishment, balance the budget, and then also being able to balance his extramarital affair with Monica Lewinsky. And the impeachment was because he had lied under oath about that affair. So the Republicans in Congress charged him with basically high crimes of perjury and obstruction of justice, making that a reason for impeachment. But the Senate acquitted him and found him not guilty. So he kind of left with a little bit of a stained legacy, but didn't have a very good economy, which is probably why the country didn't turn on him like they did on Nixon in the 70s when we had the stagflation. All right, and then we'll wrap this portion of the video up with the election of 2000. All right, you're going to watch a movie in AP Gov next year, and yes, you're all taking AP Gov, called Recount, where Florida was in dispute. When the Florida vote had ended that night, George Bush had won by barely 500 votes. So they did a recount and found that the election was within 1,000 votes, so they had to count by hand in 4 counties down here in southern Florida. And you see one of the hand recounters here trying to look at the ballot. In the ballots back then, you used to have to stick a needle through a hole and punch it out. It was called a chad. And these ballots were very unreliable, and he's trying to determine if the person tried to vote for Gore or not without having punched the needle all the way through the card. So this goes on for 5 weeks, and finally in the Supreme Court, the case is settled in the case of Bush v. Gore, and the Supreme Court ends the recount on the grounds that it was violated the Equal Protection Clause and was not being conducted fairly or accurately. So they said there was not enough time left to do the recount. That synthesizes back to the election of 1877, when, yes, again, Florida is in dispute, and the presidency was hung in the balance until February. So this new law requires the electors to be certified by the middle of December, which then the Supreme Court said the recount couldn't be done in time, and Bush, having had the most votes before the recent recount, had become the president. Okay, so that brings us into the 2000s. So we're going to stop there for part 1 of this video. So thanks for listening to the Kuhn Academy, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. We'll see you on the backside here for the 2000s.